Picture this. It's 1889 in the south of France. A man with a bandage over his ear is staring out at the night sky, and he's just frantically mixing these vibrant oil paints.
Right, trying to capture this invisible, turbulent energy in the stars that no one else really seems to notice.
Exactly. Now, I want you to completely wipe that image from your mind. Just replace it with a modern elite athlete, maybe like a gymnast or a sprinter.
Someone hooked up to all these cutting-edge biometric sensors.
Yeah, someone fine-tuning their physical movements off the starting blocks to the absolute millimeter.
They really seem like two completely different worlds. I mean, on one hand, you have the raw emotional chaos of 19th century artistic expression.
And on the other hand, the hyper-calculated, totally data-driven reality of 21st century peak physical performance.
They seem worlds apart. But Vincent van Gogh and today's elite athletes are essentially speaking the exact same biological language.
Which is wild. And we're unpacking an incredible piece of research today to find out exactly why. Specifically, Dr. Christophe Delong and Kinexa present an exploration titled Vincent van Gogh, the Master of Intensity.
Which is episode 14th of Kinexa's Visionaries of Gesture series.
Right. So we're going to dive into how the unique, hypersensitive brain wiring of a 19th century artist perfectly mirrors the ultimate goals of modern high-performance sports training. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Thanks for having me. To really understand this connection, I mean, we have to start at the foundational level of the brain itself.
The neurology.
Exactly. The sources introduced this neurological condition called hyperesthesia. Neuroscientists, looking back at Van Gogh's life, his habits, his letters, they strongly suggest he suffered from this.
And what is that exactly, for those who haven't heard the term?
Hyperesthesia is essentially an extreme and almost overwhelming sensory sensitivity. It means that every single stimulus coming into his nervous system was amplified.
Okay, so it's not just that he was this observant painter who noticed pretty colors. His brain was literally taking in more data than a normal human.
Yes, significantly more data.
Because I was looking through the source materials, specifically his letters to his brother, Theo, which, by the way, you can read a lot about on Wikipedia, where they break down the academic background of his condition.
Oh, the letters are fascinating.
They really are. He wasn't just saying, oh, the landscape was nice today. He described colors with this intense physiological precision. He described textures with a tactile acuity that makes you feel like you are physically touching the canvas.
Right.
He experienced light with an intensity that bordered on being physically painful.
His nervous system was fundamentally processing the world at a completely different volume. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of human biomechanics and athletic performance, the parallel to Van Gogh's visual hyperesthesia is something called proprioceptive sensitivity.
Okay, let's unpack this, because proprioception is a term that gets thrown around a lot in fitness and wellness spaces right now.
It definitely is a buzzword lately.
Yeah, and most people understand it as just your body's awareness of itself in space. Like, if you close your eyes, you still know where your arm is.
Sure, that's the basic definition.
But the Kinexa presentation takes it much, much deeper than that baseline awareness.
Oh, vastly deeper. The presentation draws a direct line here. Just as Van Gogh saw visual details and energetic patterns in the world that others simply couldn't see, highly trained athletes feel physical, internal nuances that the average person is completely blind to.
Wow.
Proprioceptive sensitivity at an elite level is your nervous system's ability to detect absolute microvariations in tension, load, and position.
I was actually trying to visualize this while reading the sources. At first, I thought of it like upgrading from an old, fuzzy, standard definition TV to a massive 4K display.
That's a good way to look at it.
Right, suddenly you have millions more pixels information, but that's purely visual. After reading more, proprioception seems more like the haptic feedback in a modern video game controller.
Yes, like a highly advanced rumble pack.
Exactly. Seeing your character on the screen tells you your position, but that tactile vibration tells you the exact texture of the road you're driving on, or, exactly when you're taking damage.
That is a spot-on analogy. The athlete is feeling that internal rumble of their own biomechanics.
But let's get into the actual mechanics of that. If I'm an athlete, what is the actual biological wiring making that haptic feedback happen? How does my body gather this internal 4K data?
Well, it's an incredibly sophisticated biological network. And the sources outline 3 specific types of receptors that act as the hardware for this system.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, you have neuromuscular spindles. These are tiny sensory receptors embedded directly within the muscle bellies. And they don't just detect that a muscle is stretching, they detect the exact rate of that stretch.
Wait, the speed of the stretch?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if a sprinter's hamstring is lengthening too rapidly during a stride, the spindles fire an immediate signal to the brain to adjust the tension.
Okay, so they monitor speed and length. What's the second piece of hardware?
The second are the Golgi tendon organs.
Golgi tendon organs. Got it.
Yeah, and these are located right at the junction where your muscle fibers actually blend into your tendons. Their primary job is to detect the mechanical tension being placed on the tendon.
So they measure the actual pulling force?
Right. They act almost like a biological circuit breaker.
Huh?
Say a powerlifter tries to pull a weight that might literally snap their tendon off the bone.
Yikes.
The Golgi tendon organ senses that critical tension and can actually inhibit the muscle. It shuts down its power output to save the tissue. It provides this critical, real-time force feedback.
It's like a built-in fail-safe for load. That's incredible. And the third receptor?
Finally, you have drate receptors. These sit directly inside the joint capsules themselves.
And what do they measure?
They map the exact angle, position, and speed of your skeletal frame as it moves through space.
Okay, so just to recap, you have these three massive data streams: stretch rate from the spindles, tendon tension from the Golgi organs, and skeletal angle from the joint receptors. And all of that is firing back to the central nervous system simultaneously.
Exactly. And here is where Dr. Delong's research for Kinexa puts a staggering number on this capability.
I love a good stat. Lay it on me.
When an athlete optimizes this hardware, when their nervous system is functioning at peak sensitivity, their proprioceptive system can detect changes in their body position as tiny as 0.2 degrees.
Wait, 0.2 degrees?
0.2 degrees.
That is a fraction of movement. If you're looking at someone from the outside, that shift is basically imperceptible to the human eye.
Oh, it is entirely invisible externally. But internally, that is the level of physical sensitivity required for elite performance.
That's mind-blowing.
And in fact, that is the exact same level of physical sensitivity found in high-level instrumentalists.
Oh, like musicians.
Yeah, think of a concert violinist who has to place their fingers on a string with absolute millimeter precision to hit the perfect resonant note. Kinexa is actually mapping this exact quality in athletes. They're mapping how well an athlete's nervous system can internally read those 0.2 degree variations in tension and position.
Which makes me think, if Van Gogh's hyper-aesthetic brain is taking in that much raw, overwhelming data from the world, it can't just sit in his head, right?
No, absolutely not.
That kind of neurological pressure demands an outlet. Is that why his paintings look so aggressively kinetic? I mean, let's talk about 1889.
Okay, the big year.
Yeah, he paints what is arguably his masterpiece, Starry Night. The swirling skies, the crescent moon, those massive rolling clouds.
Iconic.
And if you go to Google Arts and Culture, they have these incredible gigapixel zooms of Starry Night. When you zoom all the way in, you don't just see paint. You see the frantic, vibrating energy of the brushstrokes.
And that energy is not just a stylistic choice or, some artistic exaggeration. The Kinexa presentation highlights a scientific revelation about this painting that completely changes how you have to look at it.
What's the revelation?
Modern physicists have actually analyzed Starry Night, and they've confirmed that the spirals Van Gogh painted perfectly match the mathematical equations for fluid turbulence.
Okay, I have to pause and push back on this a little. Because when I read this in the source material, it sounded almost too perfect.
I know it sounds like a stretch.
Yeah, because the equations for fluid turbulence were formulated by the Russian mathematician Andrei Kolmogorov in 1941.
Right, 1941.
But Van Gogh painted Starry Night in 1889. Are we seriously suggesting that Van Gogh was doing complex 20th century physics calculations in his head while looking at the sky? Or is this just a beautiful coincidence where an artist and a mathematician both happen to observe the same natural patterns?
Well, it is definitely not a coincidence, but you're right, he also wasn't doing math.
Okay, so what was happening?
This brings us right back to his hyperesthesia. Because his nervous system was so radically sensitive to the physical realities of his environment, he was detecting the literal friction, the eddies, and the turbulent flow of the atmosphere around him.
You could see the wind.
Essentially, yes. He wasn't calculating kinetic energy, he was feeling it. His nervous system was acting as a highly tuned seismograph for atmospheric friction.
So when he writes to his brother Theo saying, "I dream of painting and then I paint my dreams," he isn't just being poetic.
Not at all.
He is physically transcribing the chaotic, invisible energy that his nervous system is absorbing, which actually makes perfect sense when you read the Museum of Modern Art's analysis of the painting.
Oh, the MoMA analysis is great.
Yeah, they specifically highlight this structural, almost scientific distribution of energy across the canvas.
Exactly. He was visualizing invisible physics. And this concept of fluid turbulence is exactly how Kolmogorov's 1941 math connects to a modern athlete training with Kinexa.
Okay, bridge that gap for me.
Dr. Delong's presentation explains that in human biomechanics, when a gesture is poorly coordinated, it creates what Kinexa calls kinematic turbulence.
Kinematic turbulence. What does that actually look like in practice? Because I'm picturing an athlete just stumbling around clumsily, but at the elite level, we're talking about micro movements, right?
Right. It's very subtle. Think of a marathon runner's stride. If their foot strikes the ground just slightly off center, or say their hip drops by a fraction of an inch, the physical force of hitting the ground doesn't travel cleanly up the leg. Instead, it creates micro oscillations. These are tiny, chaotic vibrations that bounce around inside the ankle, travel up through the knee, and then sort of dissipate into the lower back.
And that is kinematic turbulence.
Exactly. It's wasted kinetic energy. It is proprioceptive noise. It creates friction inside the joint, exactly like the chaotic, turbulent swirls in Van Gogh's night sky.
So it's literally turbulent energy bouncing around inside the body. And the athlete wants the exact opposite of that. They don't want chaos in their joints.
No, they want what the presentation calls laminar flow.
Laminar flow.
Yes. In fluid dynamics, laminar flow is the ideal state. It is perfectly smooth, continuous, and completely free of chaotic eddies or friction.
So how does that apply to a human body?
In human movement, a perfectly integrated physical gesture is laminar. The force transfers seamlessly from the ground, through the joints, and out through the limb.
Oh, like the perfect golf swing, where you don't even feel the vibration of the ball hitting the club face because the kinetic transfer is just flawless.
That's a perfect example. And Kinexa actually uses advanced sensors to measure this. They track the turbulence in an athlete's movement. They're literally tracking these internal spirals of Van Gogh at a staggering 200 hertz.
200 hertz? That is 200 times a second.
Exactly.
Okay, but if the ultimate goal of elite training is this beautiful, smooth, internal laminar flow, why do we see athletes relying so heavily on external visual tools?
What do you mean?
Well, you walk into any high-performance gym, and athletes are staring at themselves in mirrors. They're constantly watching iPad video replays of their form. If it's all about internal feeling, why the absolute obsession with vision?
This is a major friction point in modern athletic development, and it's a central focus of Dr. Delong's research. There is a massive biological difference between vision and feeling.
Okay, break that down.
When an athlete relies on a mirror, they are only receiving information about position.
Right, they see where their arm is relative to their torso.
Exactly. But relying solely on vision only develops half of their motor intelligence.
Yeah.
You're just copying a shape. Furthermore, vision introduces a processing delay.
A delay.
Yeah. You see the mirror, your optic nerve processes the image, sends it to the visual cortex, which then has to talk to the motor cortex to adjust the muscle.
Ah, I see.
Proprioception bypasses that visual delay. It provides presence. Presence is the internal capacity to feel the tension, the load in those Golgi tendon organs, and the texture of every single micro-adjustment from the inside out in real time.
That makes so much sense. You can mimic the exact posture of a perfect Olympic lift by looking in a mirror, but if you aren't feeling the load properly distributed through your hardware, you're just posing.
Exactly. You're posing.
You aren't actually generating laminar flow.
Which brings us to why Van Gogh's method is the Kinexa ideal. He didn't just look at a starry sky and copy the shape of the stars. He felt the atmospheric turbulence, and the painting was a direct transcription of that internal sensation.
So Kinexa wants athletes to master the internal sensory quality of a gesture.
Right. Correcting the kinematic turbulence from within, rather than just forcing their body into a shape they saw on a screen.
Okay, speaking of that internal sensory overload we're talking about with Van Gogh, I want to touch on what that actually did to his brain.
It was a lot to handle.
It had to be.
Yeah.
Because the sources highlight this insane burst of productivity toward the end of his life. I mean, he produced around 900 paintings in just 10 years.
And an unbelievable volume of work.
That is roughly one completed painting every 4 days for a decade. When you have a nervous system absorbing that much 4K haptic data from the environment, you can't just turn it off. What does that level of output mean for his brain?
Well, it tells us that his nervous system was processing information at an exceptional, almost dangerous rate. He was constantly overloaded with sensory input.
Right.
So for Van Gogh, the act of painting 900 canvases wasn't just about artistic ambition or making money or leaving a legacy. It was a biological necessity.
A necessity.
Yes, it was neurological regulation.
Meaning, wait, he wasn't just painting to create art. He was painting to release the pressure valve in his brain. Putting the paint on the canvas was how he organized the sensory chaos.
Precisely. It grounded his overloaded nervous system. And this completely shifts how we view physical training. This perfectly bridges us to the core Kinexa philosophy.
How so? Because traditionally, physical training is about causing stress to build muscle, not releasing it. You lift heavy to break the muscle down.
And that's a very outdated, purely physiological view. Dr. Delong's approach argues that proper, high-level physical training functions exactly like Van Gogh's painting process.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, good training isn't just about lifting heavy things to break down muscle fibers. Proper training is about regulating the nervous system.
Okay, so it's a neural release.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you execute a movement with perfect laminar flow, you are organizing the neural signals in your brain. You are managing cortisol, which is the body's primary stress hormone.
Right.
You are optimizing that proprioceptive sensitivity and strengthening the motor cortical connections. Peak athletic training is fundamentally neurology, not just physiology.
I love that shift in perspective. You're not just building muscle, you're actively organizing your nervous system.
That's the goal.
But how do we take this beautiful theory, I mean, Van Gogh, the fluid dynamics, the neurological regulation, and actually apply it? How does a system like Kinexa measure this invisible, turbulent energy in a real athlete today?
The source material actually breaks down the Kinexa blueprint into 3 specific pillars of measurement. This is how they turn abstract neurological theory into actionable, concrete athletic data.
Okay, what's the first pillar?
The first pillar is the proprioceptive sensitivity index.
So basically establishing the baseline of that internal haptic feedback we talked about earlier.
Yes, exactly. It's a real-time measurement of the athlete's proprioception. It essentially maps those tiny 0.2-degree micro-adjustments to find out exactly how sensitive your internal hardware really is.
And once you know that.
Once they know your baseline, they can create protocols to refine and sharpen it.
Okay, so you establish the baseline of internal awareness, and then pillar 2 looks at the actual movement itself, I assume.
Right. The second measurement is the kinematic turbulence score.
That's the 200 hertz measurement.
Exactly. This measures the exact level of physical turbulence during a movement at that 200 hertz rate. If a runner's stride shows a high score, it means their joints are absorbing a massive amount of micro-oscillations and chaos.
Which is bad.
Very bad. So Kinexa's technology uses this data to guide the athlete toward a low score, which equals smooth, seamless laminar flow.
I like that because it gives the athlete a highly specific neurological metric to chase, rather than a coach just yelling at them to run faster or try harder.
It takes the guesswork out entirely.
And then the third pillar pulls all the way back to look at the entire human being, right?
Yes, the neuroregulation audit. This evaluates the overall holistic state of the athlete's nervous system. It looks closely at metrics like heart rate variability.
HRV.
Right. Heart rate variability, or HRV, measures the tiny millisecond differences in time between your heartbeats. A high HRV means your nervous system is adaptable, recovered, and relaxed.
And a low HRV.
A low HRV means you're stuck in a stressed fight-or-flight state.
The audit also looks at motor recruitment patterns, right? Basically, checking if your brain is firing the right muscles in the correct sequence or if it's compensating because it's fatigued.
Exactly. The ultimate goal of this neuroregulation audit is to answer one critical question. Is your current training program actively regulating your nervous system, or is it overloading and frying it?
Right. Just like Van Gogh needed to paint to organize his mind and find relief.
Exactly. An athlete's training should leave their nervous system more organized and resilient, not constantly battered by chaotic stress.
It is a completely holistic framework. We have covered incredible ground today.
We really have.
I mean, we started with a 19th century artist whose hypersthetic brain allowed him to physically feel the friction of the sky, transcribing the literal physics of fluid turbulence 50 years before the math even existed.
It's still hard to wrap my head around.
And then we've seen how modern technology, through the lens of Dr. Christophe Delong and Kinexa formation, uses those exact same principles to optimize human movement today. They've taken the concept of Van Gogh's intense internal feeling and applied it to athletic biomechanics, measuring proprioception to eliminate chaos and create perfect laminar flow.
It's a brilliant connection that really highlights how ultimately Kinexa is doing what Van Gogh did on canvas. They're measuring, mapping, and harmonizing the swirling kinetic energy that the naked human eye simply cannot see.
It makes you look at every physical movement completely differently, which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over today.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we've talked about elite athletes using sensors at 200 hertz to track kinematic turbulence on the field or on the track. But how long will it be before we can wear commercial devices that map the kinematic turbulence of our everyday lives?
Oh, wow.
Right. Imagine wearing a smartwatch that doesn't just track your steps or give you some generic sleep score, but gives you a real-time metric of the proprioceptive noise running through your nervous system.
That would be game-changing.
You could visually see the internal chaos caused by a stressful meeting, a poor night of sleep, or even just sitting there scrolling on your phone for an hour. Imagine being able to look down at your wrist and see exactly when your mind and body desperately need to step away and find their own laminar flow. Until next time.